Like and subscribe right now, or you might just end up in a medieval torture chamber. Trust me, they had some wild ideas about punishment. Ever heard of the rat torture? Picture this: a rat trapped in a cage against your skin, slowly starving, and then, well, let's just say you won't be the one walking away from that dinner party. Welcome to a journey through the bizarre, the grotesque, and the downright shocking corners of history. You might be wondering, what kind of absurdity are we diving into today? How about a little chat about the 16th century practice of trial by ordeal, where you could be dunked in water to prove your innocence? Spoiler alert, if you sank, you were innocent, congratulations. Or let's not forget the dancing plague of 1518, where people literally danced until they dropped. Sounds like a night out in Vegas, doesn't it? And who could overlook the curious case of Pope Gregory IX declaring cats as agents of Satan? Yes, folks, the result was a feline extermination that sent rat populations skyrocketing, and led to the Black Death. Coincidence? I think not. But wait, there's more. Ever heard about the Great Stink of 1858 in London? The stench was so bad that Parliament had to temporarily relocate. Can you imagine the air fresheners they'd need for that? So, are you ready for a wild ride through history's quirkiest moments? Grab your popcorn and make sure to turn on loop, because this episode is going to repeat until you fall asleep, hopefully not while we discuss the sexual curiosities of ancient Rome. Stick around for bizarre facts and specific dates that will keep you awake and questioning the sanity of our ancestors. Let's go. In the dusty annals of medieval history, where knights clashed with valor and chivalry, a curious and often overlooked aspect emerged: the regulation of ventilation in jousting helmets. Yes, dear readers, while many glorify the noble art of jousting, few realize that behind those polished visors lay a smorgasbord of sweaty heads and questionable hygiene practices. Prepare to gallop through time, from the earliest records of jousting helmet ventilation regulations to the absurdities that would make even the most stoic knight raise an eyebrow. Let us commence our journey in the 12th century. The earliest known mention of helmet ventilation, or lack thereof, can be traced back to the year 1150 in the Kingdom of England. Renowned for his penchant for armor that would make even a tin can blush, King Henry II employed a rather exhausting regulation. According to the Book of Armory and Asphyxiation, a lesser-known text, Henry decreed that no knight shall engage in the noble sport of jousting without a helmet that permits the flow of air sufficient to prevent the risk of fainting dead away. But what did this mean for our gallant knights? Well, it had the potential to be a touch more complicated than one might think. For instance, the order specified that ventilation holes must be no less than 2 inches in diameter, because who wouldn't want to risk losing their lives to a lack of fresh air while galloping toward a lance with all the grace of a drunken horse? Fast forward to 1290, and we find ourselves in the bustling town of Tours, France, where the first recorded jousting tournament took place under the auspices of King Philip IV. A remarkable event, indeed. However, during this tournament, an unfortunate incident occurred. Sir Bertrand of the blindingly shiny armor, who had paid dearly for his custom helmet, was found flailing about as though he were auditioning for a role in a comedic play. Why? Because his helmet had more ventilation than a sieve. As the story goes, the air flowed so freely that Sir Bertrand became disoriented, mistaking the cheers of the crowd for the growls of a dragon. One can only imagine the hilarity of the spectators as they watched their valiant knight attempt to joust while simultaneously dodging imaginary fire-breathing beasts. This incident led to the first official record of jousting helmet ventilation regulations in France, which stipulated that, "No helmet shall have excessive air flow, lest the knight be driven mad by the voices of the wind." But hold on to your horses, for the saga of helmet ventilation regulations was just getting started. By 1350, we find ourselves at the Grand Tournament of Westminster, hosted by King Edward III. In a stroke of genius, or perhaps sheer desperation, Edward opted to have his knights undergo a ventilation test before participating. Yes, you heard that right. Knights were required to don their helmets and attempt to recite a poem while balancing on one foot. The results were nothing short of entertaining. One knight, known as Sir Cedric the Clueless, was unable to finish his recitation of the Ballad of the Bouncing Bard due to the excessive heat and lack of ventilation in his helmet. As he toppled over, he managed to exclaim, "A pox upon this helmet! I'd rather joust with a dragon." The crowd erupted in laughter, and thus, a new regulation was born: every jousting helmet must include a minimum of 3 ventilation holes, each precisely 1 inch in diameter, ensuring that knights could at least manage a coherent sentence while engaging in combat. Moving ahead to 1403, we arrive in the frosty northern reaches of Scotland, where the infamous Battle of the Cold Helmets took place. This peculiar event was marked by an unusual twist. The knights faced off against one another while wearing helmets that had been fashioned from the ice of the Loch Ness. Legend has it that the helmets not only lacked proper ventilation but were also so cold that knights were rendered completely immobile. In an effort to combat this absurdity, Lady Marjorie of the Mirthful Smile, a local noblewoman, passed a decree stating that all jousting helmets must not only be vented but also insulated to prevent the risk of frostbite. One can only imagine the sight: knights, frozen in place, while Lady Marjorie sat sipping hot cocoa, clearly enjoying the spectacle. It was not until 1455 that we see a significant shift in helmet design and ventilation regulations during the reign of the ever-ambitious King Henry VI of England. Henry, obsessed with both jousting and innovation, commissioned a group of brilliant, but eccentric, blacksmiths to create a helmet that was both protective and breathable. The result? The invention of the Henry helmet, a marvel of engineering featuring a complex system of air ducts that would make modern HVAC engineers weep with envy. The helmet boasted 4 air intakes, each measuring a robust 3 inches in diameter, with adjustable vents that knights could open and close at will. Sure, they might asphyxiate mid-joust, Henry reportedly said, but at least they'll look good doing it. This led to a golden age of jousting where knights were no longer terrified of fainting from heat exhaustion while charging at one another. However, as with all things in life, this progress came at a cost. The introduction of the Henry helmet led to a new breed of absurdity. Knights became so enamored with their helmet's ventilation capabilities that they began competing not only in jousting but also in ventilation battles. Yes, you read that correctly. In 1463, the Great Airflow Challenge was held in London, drawing spectators from far and wide. Knights donned their helmets and engaged in a series of bizarre contests, including the longest breath-holding competition and the most eloquent sonnet recitation while spinning in circles. The event culminated in a grand showdown between Sir Alastair the Airy and Lady Beatrice the Breezy, with the latter ultimately winning by reciting 5 Shakespearean sonnets while doing an impressive pirouette. The crowd went wild, and the term ventilation valor was coined, forever embedding the absurdity of the event in folklore. The late 15th century saw the rise of another peculiar helmet regulation, this time spearheaded by the Italian city-state of Florence in 1487. Here, the Florentine ventilation decree mandated that jousting helmets must include decorative elements, such as feathers, to increase air circulation. However, this regulation led to the rise of the feathered fiasco. Knights began adorning their helmets with increasingly extravagant plumes, some so large they could barely see where they were going. One knight, dubbed Sir Reginald the Ridiculous, reportedly lost a joust when his feathered headgear obstructed his view, causing him to charge directly into a hay bale instead of his opponent. The audience roared with laughter, and thus it became common practice for knights to carry a spare helmet, just in case their flamboyant feathers got the better of them. As we gallop into the 16th century, we witness the culmination of centuries of absurd jousting helmet regulations. In 1565, Queen Elizabeth I, known for her keen sense of fashion, issued a decree declaring that all jousting helmets must now double as fashion statements. This led to a bewildering array of designs, colors, and embellishments that made jousting more about style than skill. Knights could now be seen sporting glittering jewels, vibrant paints, and even feathers of exotic birds. This trend reached its peak during the Tournament of the Dazzling Helmets, in 1580, where knights were judged not solely on their jousting prowess but also on their helmet's aesthetic appeal. The victor, Sir Percival the Preposterous, donned a helmet adorned with 300 peacock feathers and was awarded the title of Best Dressed Knight. One can only wonder if he fell victim to the old adage, all the flair in the world won't save you from a lance to the chest. By the dawn of the 17th century, the practice of jousting began to fade, and with it, the intense regulations surrounding helmet ventilation. However, the legacy of those whimsical regulations lived on, inspiring tales of absurdity that made their way into the folklore of jousting. So, what have we learned from the tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations? That knights may have donned layers of armor and galloped bravely into battle, but they were also subject to the whims of fashion, absurdity, and the occasional bout of madness thanks to their poorly ventilated helmets. As we close this chapter of history, let us raise a toast to the knights of yore, who not only faced their foes with courage but did so while battling the formidable foe of heat exhaustion. And remember, if you ever find yourself in a jousting tournament, make sure to check your helmet's ventilation. After all, you wouldn't want to end up gasping for air while trying to recite Shakespeare, now would you? ### The tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. Jousting, the glorious pastime of knights in shining armor, is often romanticized as a gallant display of skill and valor. However, beneath the surface of clashing lances and thundering hooves lies a surprisingly tedious tale of regulation, specifically regarding the ventilation of jousting helmets. The history of jousting helmet ventilation regulations is a saga filled with construction methods, bureaucratic wrangling, and the relentless pursuit of knightly comfort, or perhaps knightly survival. So, grab your lance and brace for a detailed romp through the annals of history. ##### Construction methods and materials. The jousting helmet, or helm, evolved significantly from the early 12th century through the late 15th century, reflecting advancements in design as well as the increasing importance of regulations regarding ventilation. Initially, helmets were crafted from iron or steel and featured minimal openings, with the intent of providing maximum protection. However, as the popularity of jousting grew, so did the need for better airflow, especially when knights found themselves sweating profusely beneath their metal caps. By the mid-14th century, construction methods began to diversify. Craftsmen learned to forge helmets with strategically placed vents, often known as vulneraria, which were small holes or slits designed to allow for some air circulation. These vents were typically crafted using a combination of wrought iron and leather, the latter serving as a decorative element while also being somewhat breathable. ##### The costs of ventilation. The cost of a jousting helmet varied widely based on design and materials. A basic helmet with minimal ventilation might cost a knight around 10 shillings, while a custom-made version featuring elaborate ventilation systems could set a knight back anywhere from 30 to 50 shillings, depending on the intricacy and craftsmanship. Notably, these prices did not include the expense of regular maintenance, which was essential for keeping the ventilation intact. After all, a knight's head could only take so much heat before he started to resemble a melting candle. #### Bureaucratic rules and punishments. As jousting became more formalized, so too did the regulations surrounding helmet ventilation. The first documented regulations emerged in the late 14th century, spurred by a series of unfortunate incidents where knights, in their quest for glory, succumbed to heatstroke during tournaments. The Royal Edict of 1392 mandated that all jousting helmets must include a minimum of 3 ventilation holes, with a diameter of at least half an inch. Failure to comply with this regulation could result in dire consequences. Knights found guilty of presenting a helmet that lacked adequate ventilation faced penalties ranging from fines to temporary bans from tournaments. In extreme cases, a knight could even be required to wear a punishment helmet, a comically large contraption designed to serve as both a public shaming device and a reminder of the importance of airflow. #### Roles and job descriptions. The establishment of ventilation regulations necessitated the creation of various roles within the jousting community. These included 1. Helmet smiths, circa 1350 onwards, specialists in crafting helmets. Their skills became increasingly vital as ventilation regulations took hold. They were tasked with ensuring that helmets met the required specifications and often worked closely with knights to customize designs. 2. Tournament judges, circa 1380 onwards, these officials were responsible for inspecting jousting equipment prior to competition. They wielded a surprisingly powerful gavel, or, more accurately, a mace, to enforce ventilation compliance. 3. Ventilation engineers, circa 1400 onwards, a niche role that emerged as the regulations became more complex. Engineers were responsible for developing innovative ventilation solutions, such as airflow channels and detachable vent covers. 4. Helmet inspectors, circa 1450 onwards, charged with the duty of ensuring compliance. These inspectors were often the most feared figures at tournaments, capable of disqualifying knights on a whim if they deemed a helmet insufficiently ventilated. Hashtag technical specs and inventories. By the late 15th century, the technical specifications regarding helmet ventilation had become quite detailed. The regulations of the Jousting Council of 1475 outlined the following standards. Ventilation holes, minimum of 3 holes, each at least 1.5 inches apart, with a diameter of no less than 0.75 inches. Mesh grills, required for helmets with solid visors to prevent debris from entering while still allowing airflow. Adjustable ventilation, innovative designs that allowed knights to close off or open vents as needed, because, sometimes a knight just wants to feel the wind in his hair, or lack thereof. Knights were encouraged to keep an inventory of their helmet specifications for tournament inspections. A typical inventory might include helmet type, closed helm, bassinet, or great helm. Materials used, steel, iron, leather, and any decorative embellishments. Vent type, standard holes, mesh grills, or adjustable vents. Weight, ideally no more than 8 pounds, to ensure both comfort and mobility. Hashtag witty asides. One might wonder whether a knight ever pondered the irony of risking life and limb in the name of chivalry while simultaneously sweating like a roast pig under a metal dome. Perhaps that's why we never saw any knights with long beards. Ventilation issues, you see. In a similar vein, it's worth noting that knights who failed to comply with helmet ventilation regulations were often referred to as sweaty heads, a term that, while unflattering, did not carry the same sting as dishonored knight. Hashtag the transition to modernity. As we transition into the early modern period, the strict regulations on jousting helmet ventilation began to fade. By the 16th century, the rise of gunpowder weapons rendered jousting less practical, leading to a decline in the sport as a popular pastime. Consequently, the need for stringent ventilation regulations waned, with designs becoming more focused on aesthetics and less on functionality. Nevertheless, the legacy of those medieval ventilation regulations lives on. Modern motorcycle helmets, race car driver helmets, and even some sports helmets owe a debt to the innovations and lessons learned from jousting helmets of yore. Hashtag conclusion. The history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations is a fascinating blend of craftsmanship, bureaucracy, and the ever-present quest for comfort beneath layers of armor. From the introduction of ventilation holes in the late 14th century to the bureaucratic penalties enforced by tournament judges, the saga is far from dull. Ultimately, while jousting might have been a sport of honor and valor, it was also a domain rife with absurdities. Just imagine knights in full regalia, sweating profusely while their helmets resembled miniature ovens. And so, as we reflect on this peculiar chapter of history, we can only chuckle and appreciate the lengths to which knights went to ensure their heads, and their dignity, remained intact. In a world where every detail mattered, even the smallest ventilation hole could mean the difference between a glorious victory and an embarrassing tumble from the saddle, both on and off the jousting field. The tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. The medieval era was a time of chivalry, valor, and, unbeknownst to many, stifling heat. As knights donned their armor and prepared for the exhilarating spectacle of jousting, an often overlooked detail loomed large: the ventilation of their helmets. Though this may sound like a trivial matter, the history of jousting helmet ventilation regulations reveals a convoluted tapestry woven with construction methods, bureaucratic rules, and the peculiarities of medieval life. Construction methods and materials. The construction of jousting helmets saw significant evolution from the late 12th century through the 15th century. The earliest helmets, known as the kettle hat, were simple, with a large brim and minimal ventilation. As the 13th century rolled around, knights began to favor the great helm, a heavy, closed helmet designed to protect the face entirely. However, the lack of airflow within these designs raised concerns about heat exhaustion during the intense physical exertion of jousting. Ventilation solutions *. Small holes *. In the late 13th century, craftsmen began drilling small holes into the great helm for ventilation, an ingenious yet minimalistic approach. Grills and vents *. By the early 14th century, designs evolved to include grills and larger vents, allowing for a somewhat more breathable experience. The invention of the salad bowl helm in the 15th century furthered this trend, featuring prominent ventilation slots. Materials *. Initially, helmets were made from iron or steel, but by the late 14th century, craftsmen experimented with lighter materials such as brass and later, composite materials. This transition not only aided ventilation by reducing weight but also allowed for more intricate designs, which could incorporate decorative vents. The costs of these helmets varied widely. A basic kettle hat might set a knight back approximately 2 shillings, while a fully adorned great helm could cost as much as 10 shillings or more, equivalent to several days' wages for a skilled laborer. One could argue that for a knight, the real price of helmet ventilation was paid in sweat, especially during a hot summer tournament. Bureaucratic rules and punishments. With the rise of jousting as a popular sport, particularly in the 14th century, governing bodies began to establish rules to ensure fair play and the safety of competitors. Unsurprisingly, this included regulations regarding helmet ventilation. In 1384, the Royal Council of Chivalry in England issued the first formal code of conduct for tournaments, which included specifications on helmet ventilation. The decree mandated that all helmets must have sufficient openings for the escape of breath, lest they become a perilous prison. The language was deliberately vague, perhaps to encourage a bit of creativity among craftsmen while ensuring knights didn't succumb to heatstroke. Consequences for non-compliance asterisk. Fines asterisk. A knight found with a poorly ventilated helmet could face fines ranging from 3 to 20 shillings, depending on the severity of the infraction. This fine was often levied directly from prize winnings in jousting tournaments, making it a serious financial concern. Disqualification asterisk. More severe offenders faced disqualification from tournaments, which was akin to social death for a knight whose reputation rested on their prowess in the lists. Public shaming asterisk. For truly egregious violations, knights could be paraded around the tournament grounds with a sign reading, "Beware the knight who did not ventilate," a punishment that was more about maintaining public decorum than actual ventilation. Hashtag roles and job descriptions. The medieval jousting circuit was not just populated by knights swinging lances, it also required a cadre of specialized roles, each contributing to the complex ecosystem of chivalric sport. Among these roles, specific positions related to helmet construction and ventilation emerged, often filled by skilled artisans and bureaucrats. 1. Master Armorer asterisk. Responsibilities asterisk. Design and construct helmets, ensuring compliance with ventilation regulations. They were the ones who would drill holes and fashion vents, often experimenting with new designs to enhance airflow without compromising protection. Qualifications asterisk. Must have completed an apprenticeship of 7 years, showcasing a portfolio of previous work. 2. Tournament official asterisk. Responsibilities asterisk. Oversee compliance with jousting regulations, including helmet ventilation standards. They were the knights' version of modern-day referees, armed with a keen eye for detail and a penchant for issuing fines. Qualifications asterisk. Must have served as a knight or squire and demonstrated knowledge of tournament rules. 3. Helmet ventilation inspector asterisk. Responsibilities asterisk. A role that, while less glamorous, was crucial to ensuring that all helmets met specified standards. This inspector would measure the size and number of ventilation holes and ensure they were not filled with decorative embellishments. Qualifications asterisk. Must have a background in engineering or craftsmanship, as well as a deep understanding of the effects of heat on human performance. 4. Squire asterisk. Responsibilities asterisk. Assist knights with their armor, ensuring that ventilation holes were clear and unobstructed. A squire was essentially the knight's personal assistant, occasionally tasked with the less glamorous job of cleaning out sweat and debris from the helmet after a long day of jousting. Qualifications asterisk. Must be young, eager, and willing to learn, preferably with a strong stomach. Hashtag technical specs and inventories. As jousting became increasingly popular, thorough inventories of armor and helmet specifications were often maintained, because if there's one thing medieval knights loved, it was a good list. Ventilation hole size asterisk. By the 1400s, regulations specified that ventilation holes must be no smaller than 1 inch in diameter, ensuring sufficient airflow without compromising structural integrity. Number of holes asterisk. A minimum of 3 ventilation holes was mandated for all helmets, with additional allowances for decorative designs that did not impede airflow. Material standards asterisk. Helmets must be made from steel of at least 12 gauge thickness to ensure protection while allowing for the required ventilation features. Inspection checklist asterisk. Number of ventilation holes, underscore 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 underscore. Size of ventilation holes, underscore 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 underscore. Compliance with material standards, underscore 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 underscore. Overall weight, underscore 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 underscore. Decorative embellishments, underscore 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 underscore. These technical specifications were not merely suggestions, they were carved into the annals of tournament law, and a failure to comply could result in dire consequences. Hashtag 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 conclusion, a legacy of regulation. The history of jousting helmet ventilation regulations serves as a fascinating lens into the medieval world, illustrating how even the most thrilling spectacles were subject to the intricate web of bureaucracy and social norms. As knights galloped into battle, lances poised for glory, they also carried the burden of compliance with ventilation regulations, a dilemma that may have sparked a few heated debates among the bravest of warriors. The next time you imagine a knight charging into a jousting tournament, remember, behind that bravado was a carefully crafted helmet, a watchful tournament official, and perhaps a squire desperately trying to clear out the sweat from yet another long day in the lists. So, the next time you find yourself in a heated debate about the finer points of medieval sports regulations, just remember, they cared about ventilation. Because nothing says, noble warrior, quite like suffocating in style. The tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. Medieval jousting, a sport that epitomized chivalry and valor, was not merely an arena for knightly prowess but also a battleground for bureaucratic squabbles and technical specifications. Among the myriad aspects of this martial art, one of the most overlooked yet critical was the regulation of helmet ventilation. This, dear reader, is the story of how the knights of yore grappled with the delicate balance of style, safety, and suffocation. Construction methods and materials. The helmets of the medieval joust underwent a remarkable evolution from the 12th to the 16th centuries. Initially, the simple nasal helm, crafted from iron or steel, was the standard. However, as the stakes of jousting grew, so did the complexity of the headgear. By the late 14th century, we saw the emergence of the fully enclosed helm, with its myriad designs, including the great helm and the close helm. The materials used were largely dictated by availability and cost. Early helmets were predominantly made of wrought iron due to its durability and relative ease of production. By the time we reached the 15th century, advancements in metallurgy allowed for the use of tempered steel, providing a superior balance of weight and strength, ideal for those grappling with the forces of splintering lances. Yet, the cost of these helmets, well, imagine facing your local blacksmith only to find the price of a good jousting helmet rivaling that of a fine horse. A well-crafted helm could cost anywhere from 5 to 20 shillings, a significant sum when a knight's annual earnings often hinged on a successful season. Bureaucratic rules and punishments. As knights donned increasingly elaborate helmets, the need for regulations became apparent. In 1350, King Edward III of England issued the first formal guidelines regarding jousting helmets, primarily focusing on safety. These rules mandated that each helmet must possess at least 2 ventilation holes to prevent overheating during the rigors of competition. Failure to comply could result in disqualification, a harsh fate for a knight whose reputation hinged on the outcome of a tournament. However, the rules did not stop there. By 1425, the Council of Knights in Flanders instituted a series of fines for violations. A knight caught wearing a helmet with insufficient ventilation could be subjected to a fine of 10 shillings. In a twist of irony, the council also mandated that repeated offenders would be paraded through the tournament grounds wearing a sign that read, "Suffocated Knight," a punishment that ensured that no one would forget their transgressions. If only social media had existed back then, hashtags would have trended for weeks. Roles and job descriptions. Ventilation regulations necessitated the development of specific roles within the jousting community. The position of the helmet warden was created, tasked with ensuring that helmets met ventilation standards. A helmet warden was not just a fashion police officer, they were responsible for inspecting the knight's headgear before each event and keeping meticulous records. Additionally, the armorer became an essential figure in the jousting scene. These craftsmen not only constructed helmets but also had to stay apprised of the ever-evolving regulations. An armorer could make a decent living, as a well-ventilated helmet could command a premium price. Regrettably, the role of the helmet designer was less illustrious. Often relegated to the sidelines of jousting lore, these creative minds were responsible for the aesthetics of the helmets. After all, what good is a helmet if it doesn't complement one's plume? However, they often found themselves at the mercy of the helmet wardens, who insisted that form must follow function. "A knight who can't breathe is no knight at all," they would quip, wielding their measuring tools like scepters of authority. Technical specs and inventories. By the late 15th century, helmet designs included intricate features intended for maximizing ventilation. The sallet, for instance, was adorned with a series of lateral vents that allowed air to flow while still offering protection. The introduction of the armet, with its hinged visor, further revolutionized the ventilation game, allowing knights to open their visors between tilts. The technical specifications for helmets became more rigorous. A compliant helmet would feature 1. Material, tempered steel or wrought iron. 2. Weight, a maximum of 5 pounds for the fully enclosed models. 3. Ventilation holes, at least 2 holes, each no less than 1 inch in diameter. 4. Visor adjustability, must open at least 45 degrees for air circulation. An inventory log from the 1470 tournament in Bruges reveals the increasing complexity of helmet designs. Among the entries, one can find 5 great helms, all with approved ventilation holes. 3 closed helmets, featuring the latest armet design. 2 custom sallets, adorned with elaborate decorative elements yet compliant with ventilation regulations. The rise of the jousting bureaucracy. As tournaments grew in popularity, the regulatory framework surrounding jousting helmets expanded. By the early 16th century, the Jousting Council of Europe was formed, which included representatives from England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire. This council set forth a comprehensive compendium of rules that sought to standardize helmet designs and ventilation standards across all competing nations. The Codex Justorum of 1512 is a crucial document in this regard. It outlined, among other things, that the maximum allowable temperature inside a helmet during a joust should not exceed 75 degrees Fahrenheit. To ensure compliance, helmets were to be tested at the beginning of each tournament with a rather daunting contraption known as the temperature gauge of chivalry, a device that would be the envy of any modern scientist. Of course, the bureaucratic nature of these regulations led to some rather absurd situations. Knights found themselves in lengthy debates over the interpretation of adequate ventilation. Some even resorted to medieval forms of lobbying, employing bards to sing their virtues in front of council members, hoping to sway opinions on the merits of their helmet designs. Witty asides on ventilation. As one might imagine, the notion of ventilation was often met with skepticism. A certain Sir Reginald of Wexford famously quipped, "Why bother with ventilation holes? A knight should be brave enough to sweat." His helmet, however, which lacked proper ventilation, ended up on the tournament's most likely to overheat list, ironically, the only list it ever made. Another favorite was the jester who proclaimed, "A helmet without holes is like a banquet without wine, pointless." The jester was promptly removed from the jousting grounds, but his wise words echoed through the ages. Conclusion. The saga of jousting helmet ventilation regulations reveals a fascinating intersection of artistry, engineering, and bureaucracy that defined the medieval jousting scene. From the evolution of construction methods and materials to the intricate web of rules and roles, the history of helmet ventilation is a testament to the lengths to which knights and their entourages would go to ensure that chivalry did not come at the expense of suffocation. As we look back on this rather tedious yet captivating chapter, let us not forget the unsung heroes, the helmet wardens, armorers, and even the jesters, who contributed to the legacy of jousting. In a time when the clash of steel was often the prelude to glory, it was the small details, such as a well-ventilated helmet, that could mean the difference between victory and a stifling defeat. In the grand tapestry of medieval history, it is these threads of absurdity and innovation that remind us that even in the heat of battle, a little humor, and fresh air, can go a long way. The tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. In the annals of medieval history, few topics elicit as much bemusement as the regulations governing ventilation in jousting helmets. Indeed, the balance between chivalric glory and the need for breathable air amidst the clanking metal of a knight's regalia was a matter of both life and death. So, strap on your armor, metaphorically, of course, as we delve into the intricate and often tedious history of jousting helmet ventilation regulations. ### Construction methods and materials, 12th to 15th centuries. The construction of jousting helmets evolved significantly from the 12th to the 15th centuries. Early helmets, such as the kettle hat, 12th century, were rudimentary and offered little in terms of ventilation. However, as jousting grew in popularity, the need for better designs became evident. 1. Materials. Initially, helmets were crafted from iron or bronze, hammered into shape. By the 14th century, the introduction of steel revolutionized the craft. Steel was not only lighter but also stronger, which allowed for more complex designs. 2. Construction techniques. Forging. Blacksmiths employed hand-forging techniques, shaping metal under heat. Riveting. Armorers began using rivets to secure overlapping plates, enabling both flexibility and ventilation. Ventilation holes. By the late 14th century, designs began featuring strategic perforations, known colloquially as breathe holes, aimed at improving airflow. 3. Costs. The price of a jousting helmet could range from 5 to 20 marks, depending on the complexity and artistry of the piece. A knight's helmet was not merely a tool, it was a status symbol. An ornate helmet adorned with feathers or intricate engravings could cost a fortune, yet the true expense lay in the potential fines for non-compliance with ventilation regulations. More on that later. ##### Bureaucratic rules and punishments, 14th to 15th centuries. As jousting became a spectacle of nobility, so too did the bureaucracy around it. The establishment of formal rules governing helmet ventilation was largely driven by the Chivalric Council of 1348, which aimed to ensure the safety and comfort of participants. 1. Key regulations. Ventilation standards. Helmets were required to have at least 2 ventilation holes, no smaller than ½ an inch in diameter, located at the front and rear to allow for airflow. Inspection protocols. Each knight's helmet had to be inspected before a tournament. Failure to comply resulted in disqualification. Documentation. Knights were required to carry a certificate of compliance, which included the helmet specifications, signed by a certified armorer. 2. Punishments. Non-compliance could lead to a variety of penalties. Fines. A knight found without adequate ventilation could be fined up to 10 marks, roughly equivalent to a year's wages for a peasant. Public humiliation. For repeat offenders, public shaming was a common punishment. This often involved donning a poorly ventilated helmet while being paraded through town, because nothing says "noble knight" like being publicly mocked for your lack of air holes. ##### Roles and job descriptions. The enforcement of helmet ventilation regulations necessitated a cadre of officials and craftsmen, each with unique roles. 1. Armorers, skilled artisans tasked with crafting helmets. They were responsible for ensuring that helmets not only protected but also complied with ventilation regulations. Their job description included designing helmets that reflected the knight's status, integrating ventilation features without compromising structural integrity. 2. Inspectors, appointed by the Chivalric Council. These official, ventilation watchdogs, had the authority to approve or condemn helmets. Their responsibilities included conducting inspections before each tournament, documenting compliance or issuing fines, possessing a keen sense of smell. After all, a helmet that stinks of sweat might indicate insufficient airflow. 3. Knights. While they were the stars of the joust, knights also had the responsibility of ensuring their gear met the standards laid out by the Chivalric Council. They often employed armorers to customize their helmets to reflect personal tastes while adhering to regulations. 4. Bureaucrats, these were the unsung heroes, or villains, depending on your perspective, behind the scenes. Their work included drafting and enforcing regulations, managing records and documentation, sipping tea while pondering the great existential question, are we really going to find Sir Reginald for 2 tiny holes? Hashtag technical specs and inventories. To better understand the specifics of helmet ventilation regulations, let's examine the key technical specifications and inventories that emerged throughout the centuries. 1. Technical specifications. Ventilation hole diameter, minimum of 0.5 inches. Number of holes, at least 2, one at the forehead and another at the nape. Material thickness, must be no less than 1.5 mm to ensure durability while allowing for ventilation. 2. Inventory of components. Base material, high-carbon steel was preferred for its strength. Liner, a padded lining was required to absorb sweat and reduce impact. Chin straps, must be adjustable and made from leather, ensuring a snug fit that also allowed for airflow. 3. Notable helm designs. The Great Helm, popular from the late 14th century, featured a flat top with a visor and small ventilation holes. The Tilting Helm, specifically designed for jousting, it had a lower profile with better airflow. The Barbuda, a 15th century Italian design that offered wider openings for better breathability. Hashtag the evolution of regulations, 15th century onward. As we moved into the late 15th century, the jousting scene began to shift dramatically. The rise of gunpowder weapons led to changes in armor design and, subsequently, ventilation standards. 1. Regulatory changes. Increased focus on mobility. As knights began to favor lighter armor for increased mobility, ventilation regulations were modified to accommodate new designs, which often featured larger gaps. Emergence of the Renaissance. With the humanistic focus of the Renaissance, the aesthetics of jousting helmets became as important as their functionality, leading to further innovations in ventilation. 2. Legacy of helm ventilation regulations. The rules established in the 14th century laid the groundwork for modern safety standards in competitive sports. The emphasis on ventilation highlighted the medieval understanding of air quality, long before modern science caught up. Hashtag conclusion, a breath of fresh air. The saga of jousting helmet ventilation regulations is a remarkable testament to the interplay between functionality and artistry in medieval armor. While knights sought glory on the field, the bureaucratic maelstrom surrounding helmet design ensured that they could do so without succumbing to heatstroke. In retrospect, one might wonder if the knights of yore ever contemplated the absurdity of their situation, charging into battle, adorned in heavy armor, while worrying about their helmet's airflow. But then again, as any knight would tell you, nothing quite compares to the thrill of the joust, if only for the chance to show off your latest, and well-ventilated, helmet design. Hashtag the tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. Medieval jousting. The pinnacle of chivalric pageantry, where noble knights donned gleaming armor and charged at each other with all the grace of a caffeinated elephant on roller skates. But what people often don't realize is that beneath those shiny exteriors lay a labyrinth of regulations, most notably regarding jousting helmet ventilation. Yes, that's right. While the knights were busy trying to knock each other off their horses, a whole bureaucratic machinery was cranking away in the background, ensuring that no knight suffocated in a metal cocoon. Strap on your helmets, folks. We're diving into the thrillingly mundane world of medieval laws, taxes, logistics, and, dare I say, ventilation. Hashtag regional variations over time. Let's start with the regional variations, shall we? Just like today, where you can find different interpretations of a sandwich from Philly to Boston, medieval jousting helmet regulations varied wildly across Europe. In England, the famous Statute of Arms, which sounds like a law written by a particularly bored scribe, mandated that every knight's helmet must have at least 3 ventilation holes, each no smaller than a quill pen. The logic? To prevent a knight from asphyxiating mid-charge, thus maintaining a semblance of dignity while being unceremoniously unseated. Meanwhile, over in France, the regulations were a tad more elaborate. Known for their flair, and their love for all things ostentatious, French knights were required to incorporate decorative elements into their ventilation holes. This meant that while English knights were gasping for air through functional holes, French knights were doing so through intricately designed fleur-de-lis and other such frivolities. Not only did this ensure oxygen flow, but it also allowed for a dash of panache, because, naturally, if you're going to tumble off your steed, you might as well do it in style. Now, cross the Alps into the Holy Roman Empire, where the regulations took a decidedly bureaucratic turn. Here, jousting was not merely a sport but a matter of imperial law. Each knight was required to submit an application to the local lord, detailing their helmet design and ventilation specifics. This included a sketch, a list of materials, and, in some cases, a sworn affidavit from the knight's armorsmith regarding the planned airflow. You could almost hear the clerks groaning as they sifted through ledgers filled with details about airflow measurements, airflow ratios, and, oh joy, ventilation tax. Because you can't have a proper joust without a little financial incentive, right? Hashtag laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers. Speaking of taxes, let's not forget the delightful world of medieval taxation. Jousting was more than just a sport, it was an event that drew crowds, and where there are crowds, there are coins to be collected. Enter the jousting helmet ventilation tax, or JHVT for short, a brilliant piece of legislation that ensured that every knight with a helmet that had more than the legally mandated number of ventilation holes would pay a tidy sum to the crown. In England, the JHVT was implemented in 1283, during the reign of Edward I, a king known for his love of jousting and his distaste for anything that didn't contribute to the royal coffers. The tax was based on the number of ventilation holes. 1 hole was free, 2 holes incurred a small fee, and 3 holes warranted a hefty charge. Knights quickly learned to navigate this convoluted system, with many opting for creative ventilation solutions that involved cleverly disguised holes that could easily be mistaken for decorative elements. Talk about a medieval game of hide the air hole. In France, the tax took a more flamboyant form. Instead of a flat fee, knights were taxed based on the artistic merit of their ventilation designs. A knight who adorned his helmet with a beautifully etched dragon and 3 expertly crafted holes could expect a tax break, while a plain helmet with mere functional holes would be heavily taxed. As a result, the local artisans thrived, churning out helmets that were more art than armor. Who knew that the path to financial prosperity lay in the delicate art of ventilation? And let's not forget the logistical nightmare that ensued. Knights were required to employ specific smiths certified by the crown to create their helmets, and these smiths were closely monitored. They had to keep detailed ledgers of their materials, designs, and even the number of ventilation holes. Imagine a blacksmith hunched over a ledger, muttering to himself about airflow ratios while trying to forge a helmet that could withstand a lance's impact without sacrificing the precious air supply. It was a delicate balance between artistry and practicality, one that often led to some truly bizarre designs. ###### Logistics and supply chains. Now, let's pivot to the logistics and supply chains that supported this entire medieval circus. The creation of a jousting helmet wasn't as simple as popping down to your local armory. Oh no, dear reader, it was a multi-step process that involved sourcing materials from various regions. Steel had to come from the northern mines, leather from the southern pastures, and decorative elements often came from the skilled artisans in the bustling markets of Paris or London. Knights faced a veritable odyssey just to assemble a helmet that complied with the myriad laws and taxes. Blacksmiths needed to coordinate with tanners for leather lining, jewelers for any embellishments, and even artists to paint those ever-important decorative ventilation holes. You could say that creating a helmet was a bit like throwing a medieval dinner party, where every guest had a specific role to play, and one missing ingredient could lead to disaster. Of course, the logistics didn't end there. Once the helmet was crafted, it had to be delivered to the knight, often involving a series of intermediaries who took their cut along the way. Knights would frequently find themselves in a game of telephone, where the final product bore little resemblance to the original design due to miscommunication or, let's be honest, good old-fashioned medieval incompetence. And speaking of incompetence, let's talk about record keeping. In an age where literacy was scarce, record keeping was often a haphazard affair. Imagine a clerk trying to decipher a blacksmith's scrawl while simultaneously battling a hangover from the previous night's ale-fueled revelry. Ledgers often contained inaccuracies, leading to knights being taxed for extra ventilation holes that never existed, or worse, being denied participation in jousting tournaments due to incomprehensible paperwork. Let's just say that the medieval bureaucracy was as impenetrable as a knight's armor. ##### record keeping with lots of specifics. Now, if you're still with me, let's delve into the specifics of record keeping. While most knights were preoccupied with their jousting careers, a select few were tasked with the mind-numbing job of maintaining accurate records. These clerks, often underestimated, became the unsung heroes of medieval jousting. Their ledgers were filled with columns denoting the knight's name, the number of ventilation holes, the materials used, the tax owed, and even the knight's preferred jousting style, because, of course, that was relevant. One particularly infamous clerk, known only as Hubert the Incredibly Boring, became notorious for his meticulous records. Rumor has it that he once recorded a knight's daily activities for an entire year, which included not only jousting but also the knight's breakfast choices and the exact number of times he scratched his nose. Historians still debate the significance of this data, but one thing is clear: Hubert had a penchant for the tedious. And then there were the infamous ventilation audits. Yes, you read that right. Imagine being a knight, proudly parading in your newly minted helmet, only to be accosted by a gaggle of auditors demanding to inspect your helmet for compliance with ventilation regulations. These audits were the stuff of nightmares, where knights would sweat buckets under the oppressive gaze of the auditors, praying to the heavens that their ventilation holes passed the scrutiny. Hashtag a surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. And now, for the piece de resistance, a surprisingly grotesque anecdote that encapsulates the absurdity of this entire saga. Picture this: a grand jousting tournament in 1357, with knights from all over Europe gathering to showcase their skills. Among them was Sir Reginald the Overzealous, known for his elaborate helmet adorned with a dragon and 7 ventilation holes, which, let's be honest, was a bit overkill. As the tournament progressed, Sir Reginald found himself facing off against his rival, Sir Bertrand the Grumpy. In a moment of sheer excitement, Sir Reginald charged at Sir Bertrand, only to have his helmet's ventilation holes clogged with a stray pigeon that had decided to take a break on his head. Yes, you read that right, a pigeon. As the joust unfolded, Sir Reginald was completely unaware of his feathered companion. Midway through the charge, he began to feel lightheaded, the lack of airflow becoming dangerously apparent. In a dramatic twist of fate, he collided with Sir Bertrand, who promptly knocked him off his horse. As Sir Reginald lay on the ground, gasping for air and with a pigeon flapping about his head, the crowd erupted into a fit of laughter, forever immortalizing the event as the Day of the Pigeon. Conclusion. So there you have it, the tediously fascinating history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. From regional variations to tax laws, from logistics to record keeping, this saga is a testament to the absurdity of bureaucratic efforts in a time when the only thing more daunting than a joust was navigating the red tape that enveloped it. And while knights may have been charging at each other on the field, they were also battling an equally daunting foe, the complexities of ventilation regulations, all while dealing with the occasional pigeon. So, the next time you think of jousting, don't just picture knights in armor, remember the unsung clerks, the convoluted tax laws, and, of course, the all-important ventilation holes that kept those noble warriors from succumbing to the perils of asphyxiation, or, the occasional pigeon. The tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. Ah, medieval jousting. A time when men clad in metal decided that charging at one another on horseback was an excellent way to spend a sunny afternoon. Yet, amidst the clanging of swords and the cheers of the crowd, there lurked a far less glamorous aspect of this noble sport, the ventilation, or lack thereof, in jousting helmets. Yes, dear readers, prepare yourselves to delve into the riveting world of regulations, regional variations, and some rather grotesque anecdotes that would make even the hardiest knight lose his lunch. Hashtag a helmet by any other name, regional variations over time. First, let's set the scene. The medieval period, rich in its diversity, was home to a plethora of jousting styles, each boasting its own charming quirks. In England, for instance, knights were famous for their elaborate, plume-laden helmets, which, while visually stunning, resembled a furnace more than a functional piece of headgear. Meanwhile, across the Channel, the French were busy crafting helmets that were not only ornate but also notoriously stuffy. The result? A veritable smorgasbord of headgear that was as likely to cause asphyxiation as it was to protect against errant lances. As these helmets evolved, so too did the regulations surrounding them. In the late 14th century, King Edward III issued a decree that specifically addressed the need for proper ventilation in jousting helmets. After all, what good is a knight if he faints from heat exhaustion before he can even unhorse his opponent? Edward's solution was surprisingly simple: strategically placed holes. However, these holes were subject to regional variations, with some noble houses opting for bold, sweeping designs that looked more like decorative motifs than functional air passages, while others went for the minimalist approach, which could have doubled as a cheese grater. Laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers, the bureaucracy of ventilation. As the popularity of jousting spread across Europe, so did the need for regulations that govern not just the sport itself but also the safety of its participants. Enter our unsung hero, the medieval bureaucrat. Armed with quills and ledgers, these diligent clerks documented everything from the number of horses on a knight's estate to the precise dimensions of helmet ventilation holes. Yes, folks, the medieval equivalent of a building inspector was busy ensuring that jousting was not only entertaining but also somewhat safe. In 1423, the Count of Flanders, clearly having too much time on his hands, decided to levy a tax on jousting helmets based on their ventilation capabilities. "Ah, the more holes, the more taxes," he declared, perhaps while sitting atop a pile of gold coins and chuckling at the thought of knights gasping for air. This ludicrous taxation led to a flurry of eccentric designs, with one particularly enterprising knight constructing a helmet with so many holes it resembled a colander. The populace loved it, of course, because who wouldn't want to see a knight jousting while resembling a kitchen utensil? Logistics and supply chains, the unsung heroes of helmet production. Of course, it wasn't just the nobles who were affected by these regulations, the craftsmen who created the helmets had their hands full as well. Picture it, a blacksmith in a bustling medieval market, hammering away at a piece of metal while simultaneously fretting over the logistics of ventilation. Do I go for a larger hole pattern to appease the tax collector, or do I risk an ill-fated joust with a stifled knight? This was the conundrum faced by many a poor smithy. Craftsmen began forming guilds to navigate the complexities of helmet production. These guilds maintained meticulous records of materials, designs, and, of course, ventilation compliance. However, compliance was a slippery concept. Some blacksmiths, rather than risk a tax audit, created ventilation illusions, decorative holes that served no purpose other than to satisfy the regulations, much like a corporate compliance officer's checklist today. And woe betide the knight who showed up at a tournament in a non-compliant helmet, for he would be met with jeers, laughter, and the threat of being doused in a bucket of stagnant water by the crowd. ###### Record keeping, the chronicles of ventilation compliance. Record keeping. The backbone of any good medieval bureaucracy. In the archives of jousting history, one can find scrolls filled with laborious details, the sizes of ventilation holes, the types of metal used, and the number of knights who succumbed to fainting spells due to poor airflow. Not to mention, there were entire volumes dedicated to the evaluation of ventilation effectiveness, which might be better described as knights who couldn't breathe, a cautionary tale. One particularly fascinating ledger, found in the dusty corners of a long-abandoned monastery, detailed the ventilation experiments of a knight named Sir Reginald the Breathless. Sir Reginald, eager to be the best jouster in all of England, decided that he'd take matters into his own hands, or, rather, his own helmet. He commissioned a series of increasingly ridiculous designs, including a version that featured a built-in fan operated by a squire who ran behind him on the field. Spoiler alert, the fan failed spectacularly during a tournament, sending the poor squire sprawling and leaving Sir Reginald the subject of endless mockery. ######### A grotesque anecdote, when ventilation goes horribly wrong. As we delve deeper into our narrative, we can't ignore the grotesque anecdotes that pepper the history of jousting helmet ventilation. Take, for example, the story of Sir Bertram of Breathlot, a knight whose commitment to both jousting and proper ventilation was unmatched. Sir Bertram was known throughout the kingdom for his elaborate helmet, which featured multiple ventilation holes, a feat that made him the envy of many. However, one fateful day, Sir Bertram decided to mix things up with a little jousting tournament held in early summer. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the knights were soon sweating profusely beneath their heavy armor. In a moment of desperation, Sir Bertram's squire, in an attempt to cool his master down, decided to pour a bucket of water into the helmet through the ventilation holes. Unfortunately, the result was catastrophic. The water pooled at the bottom of the helmet, creating a makeshift sauna instead of a cooling system. As Sir Bertram charged into battle, the weight of the water combined with the heat created a perfect storm. He lost his focus, misjudged his aim, and instead of unseating his opponent, he ended up toppling over in a most undignified manner, the water cascading out of his helmet like a waterfall. The crowd erupted into laughter, and Sir Bertram became an unwilling legend, forever remembered as the knight who jousted and drowned all at once. ######## Conclusion: The legacy of helmet ventilation regulations. In the grand tapestry of medieval jousting, the regulations surrounding helmet ventilation may seem like a trivial detail. However, they provide a fascinating glimpse into the complexities of a time when the line between nobility and absurdity was often blurred. From the bureaucratic red tape to the regional variations and the hilariously grotesque anecdotes, it's clear that jousting was much more than just a sport. It was an intricate dance of politics, craftsmanship, and a touch of dark humor. So, the next time you picture a noble knight charging into battle, don't just think of their shining armor and gallant steeds. Remember the unsung heroes of ventilation regulations, the blacksmiths with their guilds, and yes, even the occasional squire with a bucket of water. Because in the end, what's jousting without a little air? The tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations, a breath of fresh air, or not. In a world where knights gallantly clashed in the name of honor and glory, and let's be honest, a little bit of showboating, one might assume that the most pressing concerns of medieval jousting were about armor thickness, lance weight, and that ever-important question, how do I look in this ridiculous getup? However, unbeknownst to the modern enthusiast of shiny armor and gallant steeds, a far less glamorous but infinitely more tedious concern loomed large over the tournaments of your helmet ventilation. Yes, dear reader, let us don our thinking caps, preferably something with a little more air circulation, and embark on an exploration of the riveting, if not slightly suffocating, saga of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. ### regional variations over time. To understand the true depth of this subject, we must first acknowledge that medieval Europe was a patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, and principalities, each with its own unique approach to helmet ventilation. In England, for example, the 12th century saw a burgeoning interest in what we might now call breathable design. Knights in the reign of King Richard I were known to sport helmets with small holes, or ventilations, strategically placed to allow for some modicum of airflow. These holes were often a matter of life and death, well, mostly death, but you get the idea. On the other hand, in France, where everything is just a tad more dramatic, thank you, French Revolution, the regulations were decidedly more stringent. The famed Edit de la Ventilation of 1192 dictated that helmets must have a minimum of 3 ventilation holes, lest the knight succumb to the dreaded helm suffocation syndrome, a condition that, while not officially recognized, plagued many a tournament. This led to a flurry of complaints from knights who claimed that the airflow was insufficient, prompting the French crown to appoint a special committee, yes, a committee, dedicated to helmet ventilation standards. But let's not forget the Italian states, where the Renaissance began to emerge like a breath of fresh air. Here, the regulations evolved further. Helmets adorned with lush decorative elements often found themselves in conflict with functional ventilation. The Italian knights, ever the fashion-conscious warriors, found themselves at a crossroads between aesthetics and practicality, resulting in a series of heated debates at the courts of Florence and Milan. "How can I look fabulous if I'm gasping for breath?" became the rallying cry of many a nobleman. ### laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers. Ah, laws and edicts, the lifeblood of a well-regulated society. The medieval period was rife with them, often written in Latin so that the common man could enjoy the sweet sound of bureaucracy drowning out the clamor of battle. The aforementioned Edit de la Ventilation was just the tip of the iceberg. In 1257, the Holy Roman Empire introduced the helmet ventilation tax, a revenue-generating scheme aimed at funding the construction of more tournament grounds. Knights were taxed based on the number of ventilation holes in their helmets. Those with fewer than 3 holes faced a hefty surcharge, while those with elaborate designs were rewarded with tax breaks, because who doesn't love a good medieval incentive scheme? As one might expect, the ledgers of the day were filled with meticulous records of helmet sales, taxes paid, and the unfortunate souls who failed to comply with the ventilation regulations. Town criers would announce the latest helmet tax updates, much to the chagrin of local blacksmiths who now had to account for ventilation holes in their best-selling designs. One particularly enterprising blacksmith, known only as Lance the Unlucky, became infamous for his one-hole-only policy, which ended up being quite a hit among those knights who preferred to keep things simple, or, perhaps, who were just too cheap to pay the extra tax. ### Logistics and supply chains. As with any good medieval enterprise, logistics and supply chains played a pivotal role in the regulation of helmet ventilation. The supply of helmets was not merely a matter of forging metal, it required a well-oiled machine of blacksmiths, merchants, and even the occasional traveling bard who would sing the praises of a well-ventilated helmet, because who doesn't want to hear about proper airflow while enjoying a pint at the local tavern? In England, the supply chain was largely facilitated by the burgeoning guild system, where master blacksmiths would train apprentices in the fine art of helmet making. These guilds maintained strict records of ventilation compliance, which were often referenced during inspections by local lords. Failed to meet the standards, and your helmet would be deemed non-compliant, resulting in a public shaming that could lead to a rather unfortunate decline in business. So, you see, the stakes were high, and the pressure was on. Meanwhile, in France, the infamous Ventilation Patrol was established, a group of self-appointed knights who took it upon themselves to ensure compliance with the ventilation laws. These individuals would ride from tournament to tournament, inspecting helmets for proper airflow. If a knight was found lacking, he would be publicly denounced and, in some cases, banned from further competition. The Ventilation Patrol quickly became known for their dramatic flair, often wielding feather fans to demonstrate the importance of airflow while dramatically fainting at the sight of a helmet with insufficient ventilation. ### record keeping with lots of specifics. Now, if you thought that the logistics of helmet ventilation were dull, wait until you hear about the record keeping. The medieval bureaucracy was a glorious mess of parchments, scrolls, and ink stains, all crammed with details that would make even the most seasoned accountant weep. Records from the 14th century reveal that each knight was required to submit a detailed report of their helmet specifications, including the number of ventilation holes, their diameter, and the angles at which they were positioned. One particularly pedantic knight, Sir Reginald of the Overly Specific, even went so far as to include the precise measurements of the airflow generated by said holes, because why not? These reports were then compiled into massive tomes, which were kept in the local lord's archives. Imagine the thrill of a rainy day spent sifting through pages and pages of numerical data about helmet ventilation. Historians today still marvel at the sheer amount of detail that went into these records, which provided invaluable insights into the daily lives of knights and their not-so-gallant struggles with headgear. One surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. Now, as we wrap up this tedious exploration of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations, let's dive into one last anecdote that will make you rethink your own helmet-related decisions. In the year 1372, at a particularly raucous tournament in the bustling town of Bruges, a knight named Sir Geoffrey the Gassy became notorious for a rather unfortunate incident. It turns out that Sir Geoffrey had a penchant for feasting on beans before tournaments, a choice that, while delicious, proved to be less than advantageous when it came to helmet ventilation. During the opening joust, Sir Geoffrey, clad in his finest helmet with only 2 ventilation holes, perhaps an oversight or an act of bravado, found himself not only competing against his fellow knights but also battling the effects of his pre-tournament meal. As he charged toward his opponent, a sudden, thunderous sound erupted from within his helmet, a sound that could only be described as the battle cry of a gas-powered warrior. The crowd gasped, and the opposing knight faltered, momentarily distracted by the cacophony emanating from Sir Geoffrey's head. In a bizarre twist of fate, the ventilation holes, instead of providing relief, became conduits for a most colorful display. The ensuing chaos led to Sir Geoffrey being unseated not by a lance but by the sheer embarrassment of the moment. In the aftermath, the tale of Sir Geoffrey the Gassy became a cautionary legend throughout the realm, leading to a renewed interest in the importance of proper diet and ventilation regulations. Conclusion. So there you have it, a whirlwind tour through the unglamorous yet oddly captivating history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. From regional variations and tax codes to the logistics of supply chains and meticulous record-keeping, one thing is clear: even in the midst of battle, the medieval world was suffused with the mundane concerns of life, and the air we breathe, or don't breathe, can truly make or break a knight's day. Next time you don your own helmet, whether it's for a Renaissance fair or a game of Dungeons and Dragons, remember the trials of Sir Geoffrey and his fellow knights. Because in the end, nothing ruins a good joust quite like a helmet full of hot air. The tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. Ah, the noble art of jousting. A spectacle of chivalry that combines the grace of a swan with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Knights clad in armor, mounted on steeds, charging at each other with more enthusiasm than skill, all while trying to impress fair maidens who mostly just want to get back to their embroidery. Yet, behind this veneer of gallant valor lies a ponderous tale of helmet ventilation regulations that could bore the paint off a castle wall. Let's dive headfirst into this quagmire, shall we? Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that the past is full of dull minutiae, and jousting helmets are no exception. Regional variations over time. First off, let's talk about regional variations. You'd be surprised how much a jousting helmet could vary from one kingdom to another. In England, for example, knights believed that a heavier helmet was a sign of status, because nothing screams noble like a headpiece that weighs as much as a small child. The English knights, in their wisdom, often neglected ventilation altogether. Why let a little thing like air get in the way of fashion? Meanwhile, across the channel, the French, ever the style-conscious, even had helmets designed with a bit more attention to airflow. They incorporated decorative holes, which they called aeration ports, though it's debatable whether the purpose was to provide some semblance of comfort or to allow the nobleman's pomade to escape without suffocating them during a bout. The Italians, not to be outdone, fashioned helmets that resembled art pieces, complete with intricate designs that could confuse even the most seasoned jouster. Unfortunately, all that artistry often left little room for actual ventilation, resulting in a delightful combination of sweat and despair. ##### laws, edicts, taxes, ledgers. Now, let's discuss the legal landscape surrounding jousting helmet ventilation. Yes, dear reader, there were laws. You see, while kings were busy waging wars and marrying off their daughters for political gain, they often found time to dabble in the minutiae of jousting helmet regulations. In the late 14th century, King Edward III issued a royal edict mandating that all jousting helmets must include at least one ventilation hole. This was well-intentioned, of course. He wanted to avoid the unfortunate incident of Sir Reginald the Sweaty, who fainted mid-joust and fell off his horse, causing a chain reaction that left 3 knights, a horse, and a particularly irate goose injured. But as with all good laws, enforcement was a nightmare. Local lords had their own interpretations. In Yorkshire, for instance, they decided that a ventilation hole could be anything from a tiny pinprick to a full-blown skylight. Tax collectors were soon sent out to measure helmets, armed with rulers as long as a knight's lance, leading to a bizarre and awkward spectacle of knights standing still while clerks knelt and measured their headgear. Can you imagine the conversation? "Excuse me, Sir Lancelot, but your helmet appears to be 0.02 inches below regulation. That'll be an additional tax of 1 cow. Or 2 chickens, if you prefer." #### logistics and supply chains. Let's not forget the logistics of supplying these helmets. Imagine the scene. Blacksmiths hammering away in their forges, trying to meet the demands of knights who insisted on having custom helmets made that both looked good and allowed the air to circulate. This was no easy task. The supply chain for jousting helmets was a tangled web of local craftsmen, royal decrees, and the occasional delivery of enchanted fairy dust, because what else could explain the absurdity of some designs? Blacksmiths would often find themselves with backorders that rivaled modern-day tech companies struggling to meet the demand for the latest smartphone. "Sorry, Sir Galahad, but your helmet is still stuck in shipping. The ferries were delayed due to a magical storm. You'll have to borrow one from Sir Percival for the tournament." #### record keeping with lots of specifics. Oh, and the record keeping. You'd think jousting was the only thing knights did, but no, they had to keep ledgers of every helmet made, every regulation enforced, and every tax collected. Imagine the scribe sitting in the castle hall, quill in hand, scribbling away. By royal decree on the 5th of March, 1392, Sir Reginald the Stalwart presents a helmet with 3 ventilation holes, dimensions as follows: 1.5 inches by 1 inch, which has been deemed acceptable. However, it is noted that holes should not be confused with decorative engravings, which, while aesthetically pleasing, do not qualify for ventilation purposes. These records were crucial not just for regulation, but also for historical posterity, or more likely, to settle bets at the local tavern. I bet you 10 silver pieces that Sir Balthazar's helmet had 4 holes, not 3. One surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. Now, we can't conclude this exploration without a truly bizarre anecdote that epitomizes the absurdity of jousting helmet ventilation. Picture this. The year is 1385, and the prestigious tournament of Camelot is in full swing. Knights from all corners of the realm gather, and the excitement is palpable, until the unthinkable happens. During the first event, Sir Gawain, not to be confused with Sir Galahad, though they both had far too many vowels in their names, takes a particularly nasty tumble off his horse. In an unfortunate twist of fate, his helmet, which had been hastily constructed and featured ventilation holes so small that even a mouse would struggle to squeeze through, became stuck. As the crowd gasped, they watched in horror as Sir Gawain, in a valiant attempt to free himself, flailed around like a fish out of water. The helmet, now a torture device, became a scene of slapstick comedy as he rolled and tumbled, causing uproarious laughter amid the gasps of the noble ladies. But here's where it gets grotesque. In a final bid for freedom, Sir Gawain managed to knock over a nearby food cart, sending pies flying everywhere. The crowd erupted into chaos as knights slipped and slid on the buttery mess. It was a disaster, sure, but one that would be talked about for generations, mostly because Sir Gawain, at last free from his helmet, emerged covered in cream and fruit, looking more like a jester than a knight. Conclusion. So there you have it, a whirlwind tour through the tiresome tapestry of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. Who knew that beneath the clanging of swords and the thundering of hooves lay a realm of legalities, logistics, and ludicrous anecdotes? Next time you find yourself at a Renaissance fair, pondering the intricacies of jousting, remember the knights and their helmets. Among the gallant tales of bravery and chivalry, there lies a history that is as fascinating as it is absurd, sprinkled with the occasional pie-filled catastrophe. And if you ever find yourself in need of a jousting helmet, do ensure it meets the ventilation regulations, unless, of course, you want to end up as the punchline of history. The tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. Once upon a time in a land where hygiene was as optional as a good pair of socks, the noble art of jousting became a favored pastime among the chivalrous elite. Yes, the clanking of metal, the thundering of hooves, and the roaring crowds had their charm, but lurking beneath the polished surface of this gallant sport was a rather tedious issue: ventilation regulations for jousting helmets. That's right. While knights were busy showing off their dashing looks and questionable intelligence, someone had to deal with the logistics of keeping them from passing out mid-joust due to a lack of fresh air. Regional variations over time. Let's begin our journey in the medieval heartland of Europe, where jousting was not merely a sport but a way to flaunt wealth, bravery, and a healthy disregard for personal safety. Each region had its unique spin on jousting helmet ventilation regulations. In England, for example, the knights donned their helmets with a certain flair for drama, often adorned with elaborate designs. However, these masterpieces were surprisingly airtight. So, in 1356, King Edward III, concerned that his knights might faint and ruin the spectacle, or perhaps concerned that they might be slightly less glorious than he was, issued a royal edict mandating the inclusion of ventilation holes. Meanwhile, across the Channel in France, the helm designs were more focused on aesthetics than practicality. Why bother with airflow when you could have a helmet shaped like a peacock? It wasn't until the infamous joust of 1388, when Sir Lancelot de Bouchard passed out due to excessive heat, face first into the mud, mind you, that the French began to take ventilation seriously. But let's not forget the Germans, who took the concept of helmet ventilation to a whole new level. The Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, known for his forward-thinking approaches, and, one might argue, an excessive fondness for metal, mandated that jousting helmets must not only have ventilation holes but also a mechanism to adjust airflow depending on the weather. Imagine a knight adjusting his helmet vents mid-joust. Talk about multitasking. ## laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers. With great helmets came great responsibility. Thus, a plethora of laws and edicts sprang up like weeds in a medieval garden. The aforementioned English regulations were just the tip of the iceberg. Local lords began imposing their own taxes on helmet modifications, as they realized that a knight with a properly ventilated helmet was less likely to faint and, therefore, more likely to entertain the masses. In 1394, the Duke of Burgundy decided that all knights must include at least 3 ventilation holes in their helmets. Failure to comply resulted in a hefty fine. This led to the rise of ventilation inspectors, a job title that surely stank of disappointment and despair, as these poor souls had to inspect every helmet for compliance. Their ledgers were filled with details of nightly infractions. One knight fined for insufficient airflow, another for overly decorative holes that do not serve a ventilatory purpose. The logistics of helmet ventilation became a full-time job for many craftsmen. Blacksmiths had to source lighter metals that could still withstand a lance's impact, while also being perforated enough for airflow. There were entire guilds dedicated to the creation of helmets with patented, breathe-easy designs. Each guild had its own secret recipes for alloys, and the competition became fierce. One particularly ambitious blacksmith even attempted to create a helmet that could double as a colander for draining vegetables. The results were, unsurprisingly, underwhelming. ## record keeping with lots of specifics. Ah, the joy of record keeping. Imagine poring over endless scrolls filled with details about jousting helmets. On the 5th of May, 1389, Sir Geoffrey of Wessex was fined 2 shillings for employing ventilation holes that go against the principles of good taste. It's a wonder these records weren't lost to time, considering how dull they must have been. The meticulous nature of record-keeping around jousting helmet ventilation regulations can be likened to a medieval version of a modern-day Excel spreadsheet. Each entry was a treasure trove of information: knight names, helmet designs, ventilation holes sizes, measured in fingers for some bizarre reason, and compliance status. The most detailed records came from the annual Jousting Championship of 1410, where the minute details of over 300 helmets were recorded, including the shocking revelation that 47% of knights were using helmets with ventilation designs that could only be described as aesthetically pleasing but functionally useless. ## Logistics and supply chains. As if record-keeping wasn't tedious enough, the logistics of supplying knights with ventilated helmets became a full-blown industry. Supply chains for jousting helmets stretched from the iron mines of northern England to the craftsmen of France, often crossing borders and subject to the whims of local lords who would tax the goods mercilessly. In the late 1400s, an enterprising merchant named Roland the Resourceful recognized the gap in the market and began trading pre-ventilated helmets. This genius move allowed knights to bypass the need for custom work and avoid local regulations. However, one fateful shipment to the Duke of York resulted in a scandal when it was discovered that the helmets had been manufactured with mere pinholes, hardly sufficient for a knight about to engage in a life-or-death joust. The ensuing uproar led to the Great Helmet Rebellion of 1492, where disgruntled knights protested against subpar ventilation. ## A surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. If you think this tale of jousting helmet ventilation is dull, allow me to entertain you with a rather grotesque anecdote. In 1423, during a particularly heated tournament in the town of Wittenberg, a knight named Sir Reginald the Unfortunate found himself in a rather compromising position. His helmet, while exquisitely crafted and adorned with the finest feathers, was a veritable sauna. During the final joust, Sir Reginald, who had apparently not paid heed to the ventilation regulations, began to feel faint. As he galloped toward his opponent, he lost consciousness mid-stride, falling off his horse in a dramatic heap. However, the most unfortunate part of this tale is not merely his fainting spell. As he fell, his helmet, designed to be a fortress of metal, became a trap of sorts. In an unfortunate twist of fate, the helmet's design featured a rather snug chin strap, which remained firmly affixed as Sir Reginald tumbled to the ground. Not only did he land with a resounding thud, but the helmet also flopped open like a grotesque clam, revealing an unfortunate sight. A swarm of flies, attracted by the heat and odor emanating from the helmet, descended upon him, making for a scene that was both chaotic and comical. Sir Reginald emerged from the incident with the nickname, Sir Reginald the Flyboy, a title that stuck with him long after he regained consciousness. ## Conclusion. And so, dear reader, we find ourselves at the end of our journey through the convoluted and often absurd world of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. From the regional variations that dictated how knights could breathe during their dangerous endeavors to the intricate logistics and record-keeping that accompanied this noble sport, it's astonishing how much effort went into ensuring that knights didn't suffocate while jousting. While we may chuckle at the absurdities of the past, like a knight fainting and subsequently becoming a fly magnet, there's a lesson buried in this tedious history. Even the most glamorous pursuits have their dull and complicated sides. So, the next time you watch a joust and marvel at the knights in their shiny armor and feathered helmets, remember the unsung heroes of ventilation regulations who fought an equally noble battle for fresh air. The tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. In the grand tapestry of medieval history, few spectacles are as vibrant as the joust, a fierce contest of skill, bravery, and chivalric ideals. However, as thrilling as the clash of armored knights may be, it is the often overlooked minutiae of jousting helmet ventilation regulations that reveals a labyrinthine web of medieval governance, societal norms, and regional peculiarities. This history is not merely a dry recounting of rules, it is a rich landscape populated by minor figures, petty regulations, and surprising case studies that reflect the larger cultural milieu of the time. #### minor figures and petty rules. While the likes of King Arthur and Sir Lancelot may dominate the romanticized narrative surrounding jousting, it is essential to acknowledge the lesser-known figures who shaped the practical realities of the sport. For instance, one might encounter Sir Reginald of Flanders, a knight known more for his bureaucratic tenacity than his prowess on the field. In 1385, Sir Reginald proposed the Flanders Ventilation Act, which mandated that all jousting helmets have at least 3 holes for ventilation, lest they become suffocating instruments of folly. Though his name is rarely spoken in the halls of chivalry, his regulations hold a significant place in the annals of jousting history. Further complicating the matter were the local guilds of armorers, who often had their own ideas about how helmets should be constructed. In 1402, the Guild of Armorers in York introduced their own ventilation standard, which required an intricate lattice of holes that not only allowed for airflow but were also aesthetically pleasing. This regulation was met with scorn by some knights, who felt that such decorative elements distracted from the seriousness of the joust. The ongoing tug-of-war between practicality and aesthetics provides a fascinating glimpse into the social dynamics of the time. #### Case studies with dates and lists. To illustrate how these regulations manifested in real-life scenarios, one must examine specific case studies. Case Study 1, The Great Joust of 1410. At the Great Joust held in London in 1410, a notable incident arose when Sir Edmund of Kent appeared donning a helmet that was found to have only one ventilation hole. The officiating knights, following the Flanders Ventilation Act, disqualified him on the grounds of potential asphyxiation. This led to a heated debate among the spectators, and a spontaneous petition was circulated to amend the rules governing helmet design. By the end of the event, a council of assembled knights agreed to draft a new set of regulations, which included 1. A minimum of 2 ventilation holes positioned at the front and rear of the helmet. 2. The diameter of each hole must not exceed 2 inches. 3. Each helmet must be inspected by a designated master armorer before the tournament. Case Study 2, The Grand Tournament of Paris, 1435. In a rather bizarre turn of events during the Grand Tournament of Paris in 1435, a knight known as Sir Lucien the Light-Headed was found to have constructed a helmet with an elaborate fan mechanism designed to aid ventilation. While innovative, the contraption was deemed excessive and frivolous by the judges, leading to his disqualification. The Council of Knights, perhaps influenced by Sir Reginald's earlier regulations, ruled that any mechanical ventilation systems were not permissible, as they provided an unfair advantage in the heat of competition. This ruling would go on to influence helmet designs for decades, leading to a resurgence of more traditional, albeit less breathable, designs. ### Comparisons to other regions. While the English jousting regulations were indeed convoluted, a fascinating contrast emerges when examining jousting practices in other regions of Europe. In France, a more laissez-faire approach prevailed. The French knights often wore helmets with minimal ventilation, reflecting a cultural emphasis on style over safety. The famous jouster Bertrand de Beauvais famously declared, "A knight's pride is in his appearance, not in his comfort," echoing the sentiment of many French nobles of the time. On the other hand, in the Spanish territories, the Codes de Jousting, established in 1462, was even more stringent. It required helmets to be fitted with a ventilation plume, a decorative feather that served both as an identifier of noble lineage and a means of air circulation. This hybrid of function and flamboyance captured the essence of Spanish jousting culture, highlighting the regional differences that influenced helmet design and ventilation standards. ###Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological findings have unearthed fascinating insights into the evolution of jousting helmets and their ventilation features. In the 1950s, excavations at the site of a medieval tournament ground in Kent revealed a cache of jousting helmets, some of which exhibited rudimentary ventilation systems. The helmets, dating back to the early 1400s, featured small holes and even crude mesh inserts, indicating that some knights were, in fact, ahead of their time in prioritizing air circulation. Another notable find occurred in 1998, when a team of archaeologists in Germany unearthed a jousting helmet with an inscription from a long-forgotten knight. The inscription read, "Breathe ye freely, for I fear not the fall." This playful twist on venting one's frustration suggests that even in the midst of serious competition, knights found humor in the sometimes ludicrous nature of their protective gear. Rhetorical questions. Could it be that the very regulations designed to protect knights from suffocation during jousting ultimately led to the downfall of some noble lineages? And what secrets might the remnants of those long-forgotten helmets reveal about the true nature of medieval chivalry and the priorities of its warriors? In conclusion, the history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations is a complex interplay of social dynamics, regional differences, and the ever-present tension between aesthetics and practicality. While it may seem tedious to some, it is a testament to the multifaceted nature of medieval life. The minor figures who championed these regulations and the petty disputes that arose from them are as crucial to our understanding of the era as the grand tournaments themselves. Far from being a mere curiosity, the story of jousting helmet ventilation reflects the very essence of chivalry, revealing a society that was, at once, both gallant and absurd. The tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. In the grand tapestry of medieval history, few spectacles are as vibrant as the joust, a fierce contest of skill, bravery, and chivalric ideals. However, as thrilling as the clash of armored knights may be, it is the often overlooked minutiae of jousting helmet ventilation regulations that reveals a labyrinthine web of medieval governance, societal norms, and regional peculiarities. This history is not merely a dry recounting of rules, it embodies the intricate relationship between combatants and their equipment, the evolution of metallurgy, and the socio-political landscape of the time. The significance of helmet ventilation can be traced back to the early 12th century when jousting began to gain popularity across Europe. Initially, knights wore rudimentary helmets that lacked adequate breathing holes, leading to severe discomfort during prolonged engagements. By the mid-13th century, instances of heat exhaustion among participants became increasingly common, prompting discussions among local lords and knights about the need for improvement in helmet design. One notable example of early regulation emerged in 1350 in England. The Statute of Jousting, enacted under the auspices of King Edward III, mandated that all jousting helmets must feature at least 3 ventilation holes, each measuring a minimum of 1 inch in diameter. This was a significant step towards prioritizing the safety and comfort of knights. The regulations stipulated that these holes be strategically placed to maximize airflow while maintaining the structural integrity of the helmet. As the years progressed, the sophistication of jousting helmets evolved in tandem with these regulations. By the late 14th century, the traditional great helm, a heavy, enclosed design, began to be modified with the addition of hinged visors that incorporated ventilation slots. This design not only provided the necessary airflow but also allowed for greater visibility and communication among jousting participants and spectators alike. The late 15th century witnessed the rise of the Italian school of armorers, renowned for their innovative approaches to helmet ventilation. Famous armorer Filippo Negroli, based in Milan, introduced helmets with intricate designs that featured decorative yet functional ventilation holes. His creations, such as the morion and bassinette, became highly sought after by nobility, who valued both their aesthetic appeal and practical advantages. The regulations concerning helmet ventilation were not uniform across Europe. They varied significantly based on local customs, the prominence of jousting within a region, and the influence of specific monarchs. For instance, in France, the Duke of Burgundy issued an edict in 1470 that required all jousting helmets to include a special breathing tube, a narrow passage running from the exterior of the helmet to the inside, designed to facilitate airflow. This edict was prompted by a tragic incident during a tournament when a knight collapsed due to overheating, underscoring the potential dangers of inadequate ventilation. By the 16th century, with the advent of gunpowder and the shifting dynamics of warfare, jousting began to wane in popularity as a martial practice but remained an essential aspect of noble culture and pageantry. Helmet ventilation regulations persisted, evolving to accommodate the changing needs of knights. The introduction of lighter materials such as brass and iron, alongside advancements in metallurgy, allowed for the creation of more breathable designs that did not compromise protection. A significant case study during this period is the 1565 tournament held in Edinburgh, Scotland, where the new regulations mandated helmets to have at least 5 ventilation holes. It was a landmark event where knights from England and Scotland showcased their skills, but it was the attention to helmet design that drew particular acclaim from participants. Additionally, the event prompted discussions about the role of ventilation not just in jousting, but in the wider context of armored combat. The culmination of jousting helmet ventilation regulations can be observed in the late 17th century, when the focus shifted from jousting as a competitive sport to its role in ceremonial contexts. By this time, helmets were often adorned with elaborate decorations, yet the principles of ventilation remained integral. The Baroque period brought about a resurgence of interest in jousting, and helmet designs reflected this renewed vigor, incorporating ornate patterns while still adhering to functional ventilation guidelines. In conclusion, the history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations is a fascinating intersection of innovation, regulation, and cultural evolution. From the early statutes of the 14th century to the ornate designs of the late 17th century, the journey illustrates a profound understanding of the balance between protection and comfort. Recognizing the importance of these regulations not only sheds light on the practicalities of jousting but also enriches our understanding of the medieval mindset regarding safety, chivalry, and the art of combat. #### The tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. The world of medieval jousting is often romanticized as a realm of chivalry, gallant knights, and grand tournaments. However, beneath the surface of this pageantry lies a convoluted web of regulations, minor figures, and absurdities that shape the jousting experience, most notably, the often overlooked issue of helmet ventilation. While it may seem trivial compared to the clanging of swords and cheers of the crowd, the regulations surrounding helmet ventilation reveal much about the concerns of safety, practicality, and the eccentricities of medieval governance. #### Minor figures and petty rules. In the annals of jousting history, one finds a host of minor figures, lesser-known nobles, local lords, and even eccentric knights, who played pivotal roles in shaping helmet regulations. Take, for example, Sir Reginald of Waltham, a knight known more for his elaborate helmet designs than his skill in combat. In 1346, Reginald introduced the Waltham Provision, a rule mandating that all helmets must have at least 2 ventilation holes, each no smaller than the size of a knight's thumb. While this may seem reasonable, it was rumored that Reginald had a particular affinity for thumb-sized holes, having once lost a bet to a fellow knight involving thumb wrestling. Another notable figure was Lady Beatrice of Pembroke, a fierce advocate for helmet ventilation who broke the mold of traditional female roles in medieval society. In 1382, she published a pamphlet titled Breath of Fresh Air, A Knight's Guide to Ventilation, which outlined the dangers of overheating during tournaments. Her treatise was filled with her experiences witnessing knights faint in the lists due to poor helmet design. While her pamphlet was dismissed by many as mere folly, it caught the attention of the Royal Council, leading to the establishment of the Pembroke Regulations, which required helmets to have at least 1 ventilation opening for every 4 pounds of weight. These petty rules, often seen as absurd by contemporary standards, were rooted in a genuine concern for the health and performance of knights. The consequences of neglecting ventilation were dire, as illustrated by the infamous incident at the 1396 tournament held in Bruges, where 3 knights collapsed from heat exhaustion, leading to the event being temporarily suspended. #######Case studies with dates and lists. To better understand the evolution of helmet ventilation regulations, we can examine key case studies from various tournaments across Europe, highlighting the dates and specific rules that emerged. 1. Tournament of Lunéville, 1349. Here, a knight named Sir Alaric the Unlucky suffered from severe heatstroke due to his heavy helmet design, which had no ventilation. The local lord, observing the incident, mandated that all helmets must have at least 2 openings, leading to the establishment of the Lunéville Decree. 2. The Great Tournament of Westminster, 1363, following a series of unfortunate events where several knights reported dizziness and discomfort, the Earl of Lancaster implemented the Westminster Mandate. This regulation required helmets to be fitted with a mesh lining to allow for airflow, a practice that would eventually spread throughout England. 3. The Joust of the Golden Spur, 1380, an infamous event where the Duke of Burgundy famously lost consciousness mid-joust due to a lack of ventilation. In the aftermath, a meeting of nobles convened to draft the Duke's Edict, which specifically outlined the necessity of creating adjustable ventilation flaps on the helmets used in tournaments. 4. The 1425 tournament in Paris. The Parisians took helmet ventilation to an entirely new level by introducing helmets with intricate designs incorporating both ventilation and aesthetic appeal. The Parisian model became the gold standard, featuring louvres that not only served a functional purpose but also displayed the heraldry of the wearer. These case studies demonstrate not only the evolution of helmet design but also the social dynamics at play during tournaments. Ventilation regulations were often born from the misfortunes of knights and the subsequent reactions of nobles who sought to avoid similar embarrassments. Comparisons to other regions. While medieval jousting in England is often the focus of study, ventilation regulations were not confined to the British Isles. Across Europe, different regions developed their own unique approaches to helmet ventilation, reflecting local customs and practices. In Italy, for instance, the Palermo Protocols of 1388 mandated that helmets must be crafted from lighter materials, such as a combination of metal and leather, to facilitate better airflow. This was in stark contrast to the heavy iron helmets favored in England. Italian knights prided themselves on agility and speed, thus their regulations emphasized mobility over the cumbersome designs seen in other regions. Conversely, in the northern reaches of Europe, the Scandinavian Helmets Act of 1402 focused on the use of fur-lined helmets that provided not only warmth in cold weather but also some degree of ventilation through natural breathability. Here, knights faced the challenge of both the harsh climate and the rigors of combat, leading to innovations that would set them apart from their warmer climate counterparts. The differences in helmet ventilation regulations across regions highlight a fascinating tapestry of culture and practicality within the medieval world. How did these regulations reflect the values and concerns of their respective societies? Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological findings have lent insight into the practicalities of jousting helmet ventilation regulations. Excavations at sites of known tournaments have uncovered a plethora of helmets, many of which reveal the innovative ventilation techniques of their time. One notable discovery was made at the site of the 1346 tournament in Lunéville, where an intact helmet was found with a series of small holes along the brow line. Analysis revealed that these holes were carefully positioned to allow for optimal airflow while maintaining structural integrity. Furthermore, the discovery of a cache of medieval documents in a monastery in northern France revealed detailed drawings of various helmet designs, alongside annotations that discussed their ventilation features. These documents, dated to the late 14th century, illustrate the thoughtful consideration given to both aesthetics and practicality, with sketches showing the placement of ventilation holes designed to minimize the chance of injury while maximizing airflow. Archaeologists have also noted that some helmets bore the marks of modifications made by knights themselves, who would often adjust their helmets for better ventilation during tournaments. These adaptations provide evidence of the knights' agency in addressing their own comfort and safety, further emphasizing the significance of ventilation in the jousting tradition. #######. Rhetorical questions to hook curiosity. As we delve deeper into the intricate and often humorous world of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations, one cannot help but wonder, how many knights' lives could have been saved by a simple hole in their helmet? And what can these seemingly trivial regulations tell us about the broader societal values of the medieval period? Are they a reflection of an era obsessed with honor, or merely a symptom of the absurdity of bureaucracy? Conclusion. The history of helmet ventilation regulations in medieval jousting may seem mundane at first glance, but it is a rich tapestry of social dynamics, individual quirks, and cultural differences that reveals much about the medieval mindset. Minor figures like Sir Reginald and Lady Beatrice may not be household names, yet their contributions to helmet design and ventilation regulations shaped the very nature of jousting. From the absurdity of petty rules to the practical consequences of poor ventilation, the jousting helmet stands as a testament to the complexities of medieval life. As we continue to unearth the past, we find that even the most tedious of histories can offer insights into the human experience, prompting us to question what we take for granted today. Perhaps the next time we don our helmets, be they for sports, work, or adventure, we might remember the knights of yore and the ventilation regulations that could have changed their fate. The tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations. The history of jousting helmet ventilation regulations in the medieval period may seem like an arcane subject, but it is a microcosm of the broader societal tensions, petty squabbles, and unexpected innovations that characterized the Middle Ages. The jousting helmet, an emblem of chivalric valor, also became a battleground for minor figures and their often ridiculous regulations, all while the nobility galloped about in shining armor, seeking glory. Minor figures and petty rules. It was not just kings and dukes who shaped the world of jousting. Countless lesser nobles, squires, and even guild members had a say in how helmets were designed and used. One such figure was Sir Reginald of Wimbledon, a minor knight famous for his penchant for overly elaborate helmet designs. In 1375, Sir Reginald proposed a regulation that mandated the inclusion of, at least 3 air holes, in every jousting helmet, ostensibly to prevent the dreaded suffocation of the noble spirit. This regulation was met with incredulity by his peers, who believed it would ruin the aesthetic of the helmet. Nevertheless, it set a precedent for future ventilation regulations, sparking debates across the realm. Another notable example is Lady Beatrice of Northumberland, a sharp-tongued noblewoman who, in 1423, argued that helmets should have adjustable ventilation systems that could be opened or closed depending on the weather. "Why should a knight swoon on the field of honor when a mere twist of a knob could save him?" she famously quipped. Her proposal, while innovative, was dismissed as impractical by the Council of Jousting Lords, who deemed it an affront to tradition and the integrity of the tournament. ###Case studies with dates and lists. The need for ventilation in jousting helmets became more pressing as the popularity of the sport surged, leading to a series of case studies that illustrate the evolving nature of helmet regulations. 1. The Great Helmet Suffocation Incident, 1392, during a tournament in York, a young knight named Sir Alastair was knocked unconscious due to a lack of airflow in his helmet. This incident led to the establishment of the York Ventilation Code, which mandated that helmets must have at least 2 vent holes, no smaller than the diameter of a silver shilling. The code was enforced with the fervor of a religious decree, leading to the infamous Helmet Inspection Day, where officials would inspect every helmet for compliance. 2. The Battle of the Air Holes, 1456. A contentious tournament held in the Scottish Highlands saw 2 rival factions emerge, the ventilators, who advocated for more air holes, and the traditionals, who believed that too many holes would compromise the helmet's strength. The conflict escalated into a shouting match that required the intervention of the local baron, who ultimately decreed that all helmets must feature a balanced design with no less than 3 and no more than 5 ventilatory apertures. This awkward compromise did little to quell the debate, and the factions continued to vie for supremacy in jousting circles. 3. The Helmet Design Symposium, 1489, a gathering of artisans and knights convened in London to discuss the future of helmet design. Among the attendees was the famous blacksmith, Master Gregory of Gillingham, who presented his revolutionary design featuring a built-in fan powered by a small hand crank. The proposal was met with both awe and skepticism, leading to a heated debate over the practicality of such a mechanism. Ultimately, the symposium concluded with a resolution to allow experimentation with fan designs, provided they did not interfere with the helmet's structural integrity. Comparisons to other regions. While England was embroiled in its own helmet ventilation debates, other regions had their own approaches to the matter. In France, for example, the nobility took a more laissez-faire approach to helmet design. The famed jouster Jean de La Fontaine, competing in the famed tournaments of the Loire Valley, wore a helmet with a single ventilatory slot, which he claimed was all that is necessary for a true knight. His approach was popular among the French, who valued style over practicality, leading to a notable decline in ventilation regulations. In contrast, the Germanic states were far more regimented. The Nuremberg helmet mandates of 1472 established strict guidelines for helmet ventilation, including specific measurements for air holes and mandatory inspections before tournaments. The Germans, known for their meticulous attention to detail, took the concept of ventilation to an extreme, leading to the development of helmets that resembled Swiss cheese. Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological findings have shed light on the evolution of jousting helmets and ventilation designs. Excavations at the site of the 1392 Great Helmet Suffocation Incident revealed several remains of helmets with varying air hole designs. Some helmets featured crude, circular holes, while others had more advanced slits that resembled the gills of a fish. These findings have led historians to speculate that different regions had developed their own unique approaches to ventilation based on climate and tournament culture. Moreover, a recent discovery of a helmet in an abandoned jousting field near Warwick, dated to 1456, showcased an innovative design with a built-in mesh screen to prevent debris from entering the ventilation holes. This helmet, dubbed the Warwick Wonder, has been lauded as a turning point in helmet design, influencing artisans for generations to come. ##### Rhetorical questions that hook curiosity. But one must wonder, how many knights lost their lives not to the lance of an opponent, but to the stifling confines of their own headgear? And what obscure regulations might we uncover if we delve deeper into the dusty annals of medieval jousting history? ##### The Final Showdown. As the late 15th century approached, it became increasingly clear that the jousting helmet was not merely a functional piece of armor but a symbol of status and style. The growing emphasis on ventilation led to a schism in the jousting community, with some knights embracing innovation while others clung to tradition. A pivotal moment occurred in 1492, during a grand tournament in Bruges, where the reigning champion, Sir Percival the Proud, wore a flamboyant helmet adorned with hundreds of tiny holes, each one meticulously crafted. In a stark contrast, his opponent, Sir Gaius the Gloomy, opted for a traditional helmet with no ventilation whatsoever. The ensuing match was a spectacle, with Sir Percival dazzling the crowd with his finesse, while Sir Gaius struggled to maintain composure, his face flushed and sweat-soaked. Ultimately, victory went to the knight who balanced tradition and innovation, illustrating a shift in the cultural understanding of jousting helmet ventilation. Conclusion. The tedious history of medieval jousting helmet ventilation regulations reveals a tapestry of human experience, filled with minor figures and their absurd rules, passionate debates, and the relentless pursuit of innovation. The jousting helmet, once a simple piece of armor, evolved into a complex symbol of nobility, identity, and the age-old struggle between tradition and progress. As we unearth these narratives, we gain deeper insights into the very fabric of medieval society and the relentless spirit of competition that defined it. As we ponder the past, we are left with an enduring question: what lessons can we learn from these jousting regulations that may still resonate in our modern world? What boundaries are we willing to challenge in the name of innovation, and how will future generations remember our own peculiar rules? And that's a wrap. We've journeyed through the wild world of topic, where we learned that even the most mundane things can pack a punch. Who knew a paperclip could hold the key to creativity? Here's a surprising fact to leave you with. Did you know that the average person will spend about 6 months of their life waiting for red lights to turn green? Talk about time on your hands. If you enjoyed this dive into the unexpected, give us a like, subscribe for more mind-bending content, and drop a comment below with your favorite takeaway. Don't forget to check out our related episodes for more intriguing insights that'll keep you hooked. And hey, remember to turn on loop so this episode plays on repeat until you drift off into dreamland. Sweet dreams and see you next time.